What's the purpose in life?
Am I contributing more than I'm taking?
Is it all for naught?
Will I be able to manifest all of my goals?
How to cope with grief?
Are we all just gonna end up with nothing in the end?
These are some of life's biggest questions, and they're the ones that keep me up at night. Not just because I'm trying to be the best father, son, husband, human I can be, but because finding answers is also my job. I'm not a religious leader, therapist, or life coach. I'm a research scientist. And for the past 30 years, I've been studying how people form connections, build character, and become happier. The goal, of course, isn't just to find out how all of this works, but to use what we find to create techniques, strategies, or even life hacks to help people. But over the past few years, I've had a kind of epiphany, or maybe more of a nagging realization, that the powerful techniques I thought my scientific colleagues and I had discovered might not be that new after all. Many were discovered in other labs of sorts, ones embedded in the joys, anxieties, and sorrows of life. Morning rituals like the Jewish Shiva, healing practices like Native American sweats, or altered states coming from meditation or psychedelics. You could say I was surprised, but I think a better word is humbled. For millennia, people turned to ministers, rabbis, shamans, and imams for answers to big questions about morality, meaning, life, and death. They not only beat scientists to studying these ideas by a long shot, they've been honing techniques to help for thousands of years. Sure, they couldn't scan people's brains or run randomized control trials to see if their techniques worked. That's where science comes in. But they figured out ways to use parts of our minds and bodies to help us thrive.
Liturgy, that allows us to be able to express those moments of gratitude when we might not be able to do that otherwise.
If you want to get a real good result of meditation, then we have to have compassion.
When we look to the tradition, we find something that is alive in it.
Now, I know that religion and science have often been at odds, but if my work has convinced me of anything, it's that you can't argue with evidence. I'm not talking about evidence of whether God exists. That question relies on faith. It's not one science can answer. I mean evidence of how religious practices can improve people's lives. In this podcast, I'll speak to scientists, spiritual teachers, and religious leaders to explore what we can learn from these practices, as well as how we can use them in our own lives, whatever our beliefs.
As an atheist, I had what I would consider a full-blown mystical or spiritual experience.
How can we better, more effectively leverage beliefs and the social context to improve active drugs and therapies?
We wanted to do some research where we look at, can meditation help people extend compassion?
To imagine yourself on your deathbed and imagine yourself asking, what would I have liked to have done?
Participation in religious community really does have strong effect on people's mental health and physical health.
It's by working together, talking across the boundaries that usually divide us, science versus religion, one faith versus another, that we'll find new ways to make life better. I'm Dave DeSteno, and this is How God Works.
When you ask people what is religion, they think you mean, what do you believe? Do you believe in God? Do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? And when you look beyond Protestantism, or certainly once you look beyond Christianity, you start to see a much richer and much more complex understanding of what religion really is. It's not what you believe, it's more about what you do.
That's Casper Kuile, a past ministry innovation fellow at Harvard Divinity School, a co-founder of Sacred Design Lab, and author of The Power of Ritual. And he's raising a good point. Religion really might be just as much about what you do as about what you believe. And so I wanted to talk more with him about it. So Casper, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with what seems like a basic question, but it probably isn't. And that is, how do you define what a religion is?
Well,
and I know I'm not saying, give me the gold standard definition, because I know there isn't one. So give me the Casper definition.
I guess the way I think about it is it's a a system of relationships and beliefs and practices that helps people feel connected to a community of belonging, a set of practices that help them become the kind of person that they want to be, and that helps them feel part of something bigger, something beyond themselves. So the way in my work that I often think about this is that it's about belonging, becoming, and beyond. Those three Bs that kind of gives me that foundation.
Did you grow up religious?
No, I didn't grow up with anything. So my parents are Dutch, and I think along with Denmark, Holland is the most secular country in the world. My parents never went to church. My grandparents, as far as I know, were never really religious in any formal way. And so I grew up with a real absence of religion. But I went to a Waldorf school. And so as a small child, I had a very, very rich experience of ritual without any kind of imposition of dogma. We celebrated Easter by painting Easter eggs, and we sang songs on Michaelmas, and we jumped across a fire on Midsummer, and Christmas carols, singing to the barnyard animals on Christmas Eve. And so essentially my life can be summed up by like crafts and singing on ritualized moments throughout the year. But it meant that I was able to experience the wonder of ritual, especially ritual in community, in a way that was always inspiring and beautiful without it ever feeling dangerous or frightening.
If rituals are the secret power of religions, it might explain what's going on at this moment in time. People have been leaving traditional faiths over the past 2 decades in droves. In fact, 2020 was a kind of watershed moment in the U.S. According to Gallup, it's the first time that a majority of U.S. citizens reported not belonging to a church, synagogue, or mosque. There are good reasons why people are leaving. Cover-ups of abuse and financial scandals, gender discrimination, and even just disagreements over what to believe. But here's the surprising thing. These same people don't seem to be rejecting spirituality in general.
The data tells us that 1 in 5 people who say they're nothing in particular still pray every day. 2 out of 3 of those still believe in a higher power or God of some sort. So what we're seeing is not a wholesale rejection of religion, but really a transformation of religion.
The point that you're saying is it is very profound. So I think of rituals as tools, and we'll talk about that as ways to kind of build connection, attach us to the beyond, and help us become, as you said. When we leave these faiths, we are leaving the institution behind that may be problematic, or even the theology for some people. The theology can be problematic. But we're leaving behind a whole set of tools that usually fly below our radar that we use but aren't explicitly aware of why we're using them to make life a little better.
I really want to lift up something you just said, David, which is that more and more people are becoming less and less institutionally religious, right? When people are asked, what religion are you? More and more people are saying none of the above, nothing in particular. But it doesn't mean that everyone is completely rejecting the wisdom of these traditions or the desire to be in community or even having practices.
That's why Casper co-founded the Sacred Design Lab. He wanted to explore the rapidly changing landscape of people's spiritual lives, and more important, help find ways to support their growth.
Sometimes when we get enthusiastic about rediscovering or innovating with these ancient traditions, we think, okay, let's create a ritual and it's all about, February is the month of gratitude or March is the month of kindness. And often it feels so empty and honestly like thin and fake and bad very, very quickly. And I think for me, the real magic is when we look to the tradition, we find something that is alive in it, something that still has power and resonance in our context today, and then find a way to bring it out so that it feels contextually appropriate in this moment in culture. And so it's always better when you're thinking about creating rituals is not to start out of nothing, but to start, for an individual, to start by looking at your own life and say, well, what is meaningful to me? Here's a song I grew up singing with my grandmother, or here's a dish that we made every Christmas Eve, or this is a place that we would go as a family once a year, or, everyone has moments of meaning in some way as part of their life. And rituals are so much more powerful when they're building on something that's already meaningful. So finding a way to integrate your favorite poem, into an end of the week ritual, for example, will just make that so much more meaningful. So that's, for me, one of the most important principles when we're thinking about ritual design is to integrate something that's ancient, something that's already meaningful, something that lives in us or in the tradition. And what you want to find is a way for the ancient to meet the emergent, right? For that ancient wisdom to find a place in today's contextual culture. So in the work that we do at Sacred Design Lab, we're really thinking about, okay, here is a situation where a group of people needs to find a bond within a relative quick amount of time, or we want these people to be grounded in an experience of hope. What are some ancient practices that are relevant to this group of people or to this place or this organization that we can lift up and find a new home for? And honestly, this sounds complex. It's really not. It's like, share a meal together, tell a story about a time when you felt hopeful, share silence, dance together.
So let me offer this example. People talk about rituals in all kinds of ways. I can have a ritual where every day when I come into the house, I pour myself a glass of wine or a cup of coffee and I sit down in my little nook and I read. Or I can have a ritual that every day I light a candle and then have dinner by it. But what's the difference between, say, lighting a candle when the power's out versus lighting a candle for Shabbat? What makes something a ritual versus kind of a habit?
Yeah. So the way that I think about that difference of habit and ritual is really about three things. The first is about setting an intention. So it's not just a functional purpose of lighting the candle because the power is out, that there's a meaning-oriented intention that we're adding to this little action. So it might be, we're just marking the difference between the end of the work week and the beginning of a day of rest. It might be, here we are around a dinner table together. I'm so glad you came to visit from Arizona, right? It could be, it's your birthday, whatever it is, that there's an additional layer of meaning that we want to lift up in some way. Even in a moment of private devotion, it might be like, I want to cultivate a sense of gratitude. So I'm lighting this candle. So that's the first thing, to bring an intention to the action. Secondly, it's to pay attention to the ritual while you're practicing it. So unlike a habit of taking the dog out for a walk or doing the dishes while you're listening to a podcast or you're singing that fantastic Olivia Rodrigo song, whatever it is, there's an awareness and a presence in our physical bodies, in our minds, while we're practicing the ritual. So from my read, this is why you have so much kind of multi-sensory design in religious rituals, right? Whether it's incense that you smell or beautiful stained glass windows that you can look at, music that you listen to, all of these things are there to help focus our awareness in this present moment. And then finally, in this little triptych that I think about is repetition. So is coming back to this practice time and time and again. For many people, that might be a practice, every day, every week. But even if it's happening once a year, right, you're coming back to it in the calendar year every Halloween, or you're coming back to it as I do on May Day morning when I go and dance around a maypole on the first day of May, as I did as a little kid. You're putting that ritual in a specific moment of time, and you're always coming back to it. And so that intention, attention, repetition kind of strategy or way of thinking separates that idea of just a simple habit from a ritual for me.
Yeah, I like that, because what you're really saying is that in some ways the attention and the intentions we give it really is marking something special to be used for a special purpose. And I think sometimes we're not aware of all of the purposes. But the other part that I think is really important from a psychological standpoint, which is kind of where I live, is the actions themselves actually affect our bodies in ways that I think open the mind, nudge the mind in ways that help us achieve whatever that goal, that becoming is. I think it's fair to say that you can think of rituals as a technology of sorts, one meant to influence our thoughts and actions. But what happens if we try to tailor these rituals too much? Is there a danger of becoming a church of one?
As we think about the future of spirituality and religion and ritual, is that, as things become more personalized and dispersed, we're more and more resistant to any sort of universal story or kind of all truth claiming narrative. These individual practices do still need some coherent story. Because I think sometimes when we break things down to their most elemental parts, we're missing the source that makes the meal. And this is something I think is really, really difficult. And yet without some shared landscape in which our lives are happening, that's a question that I'm really struggling with. Is like, what does that look like?
Do you have a sense of how much of that spirituality is kind of this me, myself, meditating in my own room versus forming those connections? Because I worry about us moving into spirituality kind of in an atomistic way.
So the danger that you're pointing to is very, very much a trend of moving away from an institution or from a collective group and towards something that is self-defined and self-practiced. So whether it's, using Headspace by yourself, whether it's going to listen to a piece of music or doing
some psilocybin in your house,
yourself. Yeah, exactly. Listening to a podcast, maybe. But there's all sorts of ways in which people are able to find something that's really personalized for them, right? The exact mix of Judaism and Hinduism that fits my family, or exactly the right kind of mix of spirituality, astrology, but also secularism. And what's beautiful about that is that we're finding things that really work for us, right? There's something about being seen and and feeling like, yes, this person understands me and my context, which is increasingly mixed and is increasingly different from the kind of cookie cutter standard. However, the more we find something that's personalized, the less then that we share with others. And I don't think people are unaware of this. We get it, right? When you ask people, what do you long for? People will start talking about relationships. They'll start talking about, I wish there was a community, or I wish I could feel like I was part of something. And I think people are trying to find new ways to be in community. And that gives me a lot of hope. One of the things I spend a lot of my time thinking about at Sacred Design Lab is, what are the structures that will hold people in relationship in this kind of in-between time? So if congregations, place-based communities that meet a certain number of times a week, if that's been the distribution kind of service of religious wisdom over the last number of 100 years, but that is less culturally resonant, less financially viable, increasingly so, what are the new structures that will hold people in that exploration together? And so I'm really curious if we'll see things like a pod, which we've all practiced now during COVID, like a smaller number of people in closer relationship that doesn't necessarily have to be place-based, but some kind of new form of committed, spiritual searching or exploration or journeying together, if that might become more of a structure of community or spiritual community, in the absence of a grand narrative like that. Because I definitely am very, very skeptical of someone sitting down and writing a story that suddenly is going to resonate with everyone. I'm much more invested in the way in which we can commit to one another relationally and support and hold one another accountable to whatever the story is that we have in our hearts.
Though Casper is skeptical of the grand narrative, there's one story with a wide appeal that he can get behind. One with witches and dementors and a very special young half-blooded boy. If his name sounds familiar, you might also know Casper from his previous gig, co-hosting the popular Harry Potter and the Sacred Text podcast. Its goal isn't to heap praise on the series, or even to talk about J.K. Rowling's Twitter feed. It offers a way for listeners to explore life's big questions by applying ancient techniques for textual reading. Techniques like the Catholic Lectio Divina or the Jewish Pardes that can help listeners contemplate and engage with big moral questions the book raises. But using sacred techniques for a fictional novel might upset some people.
I was expecting hate mail. I was expecting angry rabbis, angry ministers, angry priests. The great joy, honestly, David, was that our community of people who listened to that show included both secular people, people who'd really been hurt by religion, but also included religious people. I had Presbyterian ministers writing to me saying, I've never even encountered Lectio Divina. I'm now using it in my congregation. Or a rabbi who said, I've never heard Pardes come alive like this. I want to do this with my congregation. And so the greatest gift, I think, or at least one of them, of doing the podcast was helping religion be relevant, and frankly also helping a lot of people who were very angry or saddened by their experience of religion find a way into their own spiritual life and perhaps even into these traditions. And so that's why I'm so passionate about these gifts of tradition.
Sometimes, though, there's not a perfect ancient ritual at hand. Sometimes you need something new. So, Casper, for our listeners who are interested in how to create or use a ritual in a new way, is there any kind of example that you can give us?
So one of my favorite little ritual kind of creations that I did a couple of years ago was, I moisturize my face every morning. So there's a habit that I do every morning, probably without fail. And I thought, well, here's a moment that I could add a layer of meaning to. And so I took one of the kind of wisdom sayings that always struck me, and I literally say it as I put the moisturizer on my face. So I'll put some on my forehead, and I'll say, life is full of joy and suffering, and today will be no different. And I think about it as I'm massaging my face with the moisturizer. And usually by the end of the day, I'm like, there was the joy and there was the suffering. And recently I had a day where everything went so well. And I was like, wow, today's only been a day of joy. And then I really stubbed my toe on my bedpost just as I was getting into bed. And I was like, there is the suffering. But it can be as simple as that, right? You have that intention of I'm just going to remind myself that, today's going to be fun, but it's going to be hard too. You have the attention of the smell of the moisturizer, the touch of my hand on my face, and then the repetition of doing it every morning. So finding something that you do frequently that feels like it's a kind of a space in which you can bring that ritual is a great way to start.
You might have noticed a term that came up in my discussion earlier with Casper, one you'll hear a lot about in psychology: nudging. Basically, it means a technique that, while seemingly easy to use, affects people's thoughts and behaviors without their knowing it. Make people opt out from retirement plans rather than opt in, and they'll end up saving more. But when it comes to rituals, we're talking about an entirely different type of nudge, one that operates using the brain's hidden language. Let me give you an example from my own lab. We were looking for a way to make strangers feel connected. Not just yeah, that guy, he's okay, but in a way that really mattered. One where they'd lend each other a hand if needed. There's a lot of research suggesting that synchronous movement helps people cooperate. So we thought it might be a key. By synchronous movement, I mean moving in coordination with each other. We've all seen this in flocks of birds or schools of fish, but we suspected that, in humans at least, it could create a bond out of thin air. To find out, we brought strangers into our lab and had them sit down across from each other. They didn't talk at all, they just put on earphones. We told them that they'd hear beats, and as they heard each one, they should tap the sensor on the table in front of them. Now, for some of these pairs, we set the beats to be synchronized. For others, they were random. Seems simple enough. But when we asked people how similar they felt to the stranger across the table, those who had tapped in sync felt more similar. They'd say things like, I think he was in my class last year, or I think we met at a party. None of that was true, but the simple act of moving together in time created a sense of familiarity and liking, one they were now trying to justify. 50% of them volunteered to go help if they had tapped in sync. Think about that. 50% of people wanted to help someone they didn't know, never met, didn't even speak to get out of a jam. It's not that they were just nice people. Only 18% volunteered to help without tapping in sync. That one simple act of moving together in time was all it took to turn a stranger into a friend in that instant. I thought, this is great. We found a new way to help people connect. But then as I looked around, I saw synchrony used in every religion I could find. People sing, sway, bow, and kneel together all the time in worship. And you know what? Those extra things rituals use aren't window dressing. Chanting and reciting prayers aren't just about belief. They're also working on our bodies. Research shows they slow our breathing rates, which itself relaxes our minds, and makes us more open to connecting with others. And in later studies that looked at synchrony with these added elements, ones that had people sing Hindu kirtan together, as opposed to just moving their bodies, found even stronger effects on closeness and cooperation. Where we were using a single nudge, rituals were using many. Where we're playing single notes, they were playing symphonies. And these symphonies add up to some pretty remarkable long-term health benefits, according to public health researcher Katelyn Long.
Religious service attendance actually has very similar effects to not smoking or tobacco cessation or fruit and vegetable consumption.
Katelyn works at Harvard's Human Flourishing Program. And if you're not exactly sure what that means, I wasn't either.
The simple way we talk about it is that all parts of a person's life are going well. And I would say more or less at the end of that. And there are many definitions of flourishing, to be clear. But the way we approach it is in these 5 domains. We think of happiness and life satisfaction. We think of physical and mental health. We think of meaning and purpose, character and virtue, and then close social relationships.
Okay, so the one I really want to focus on right now, though, is how it affects our health, both our physical health and our mental well-being.
Well, the research that is the strongest on religion and subsequent health and well-being is about religious service participation or participation in religious community. But the one that really sticks out a lot, surprisingly so, is religious service attendance. And frankly, as a preacher's kid, when I first saw that research, I was like, yeah, go to church. Like, it wasn't interesting to me because that was kind of something I'd been exposed to as a kid. But as I got deeper into the empirical work around it, it was striking. Participation in religious community really does have strong effect on people's mental health and physical health.
But like any other healthy practice, it's not one and done. You don't eat one apple one day to keep the doctor away. To see results, you have to do it regularly. In science speak, we call this a dose-response relationship. The more you do, the bigger the effect. But people also have to want to do it. They have to value participating. So it's not just saying, I believe in God, or maybe showing up at church or temple once in a while. It's actually engagement in those tools, those practices.
Yeah. So if you go just occasionally or ever so often, you don't actually see the effects. And so the more frequently you go, on the whole, you see these increased aspects, not just of your physical health, but also on your mental and emotional and even your social health and the health of your relationships, on lower depression and anxiety, lower rates of suicide, increased rates of hope and optimism, these kinds of things that we kind of all assume are a net positive. They happen to people who attend services the most frequently.
So, you know, in science, we talk a lot about this has a net positive, or makes a significant difference between groups. But I'm just trying to get a little sense of like how much it matters, right? Sometimes in medicine, you'll hear doctors say, this will extend your life, this, new cancer treatment. You say, okay, how much? And they'll say 2 months.
Right.
And so, right, the question is, one, for knowledge purposes, it's good to know that it does something.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you can help our listeners just get a sense of like how much it matters.
Sure. So one of the great ways to handle that is to think about other things that we know extend life, like getting physical exercise or activity, or not smoking, or eating more fruits and vegetables. Religious service attendance actually has very similar effect sizes to those types of exposures.
Regularly attending services would be as good for my health as going to the gym or eating broccoli? Really? But after reviewing hundreds of studies, the Mayo Clinic found that religious attendance improved heart health and blood pressure. People who regularly attended services also tended to get better nutrition, smoke less, have fewer hospitalizations, and shorter stays in the hospital if they were admitted. Sometimes, though, life can change rapidly. We've seen depression and anxiety skyrocket over the past year and a half of the pandemic, and with it, a rising feeling of hopelessness in many. That got me thinking about whether spiritual practices could help, even in the face of such a profound change to people's lives. I want to ask about a specific type of tragic outcome, and that is death of despair, With the opioid crisis and even the stress and isolation of the pandemic, we've been seeing people taking paths that directly or indirectly cause their deaths: suicide, drug overdose, alcohol-related diseases. So I'm wondering, is there any evidence that spiritual practices can prevent these really tragic types of deaths?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this makes me think of a study that came out last year that looked at about 100,000 male and female health professionals and used different sources of data to do an analysis of the group. And the outcomes that they were considering to be deaths of despair were suicide, unintentional poisoning by alcohol or drug overdose, and then chronic liver diseases. And the study found that compared to people who never went to church, never attended religious services, those who went at least one time a week were 68% more likely to survive. That was the female health professionals. And for men, it was 33% more likely to survive. And so you see there where religious service attendance had a really noticeable effect on survival for this particular group of people in this study.
These links between religion and health seem pretty impressive. But on the surface, at least, they don't necessarily imply that spiritual practices are creating better health. Maybe it's just being around other people that matters.
It was actually the real point of critique of a lot of this work in its early iterations, because people were doing research at one point in time. So they could say, hey, look at all these people who participated in religious community have lower depression. Isn't that really interesting? But you could just as easily say, hey, look at all these non-depressed people who get out of bed on, a day of the week and go somewhere. You don't know which comes first. And so if we're going to understand this well, we need to look at how this works over time.
Longitudinal analysis is a fancy word that just means following people over time. This way you can see what comes first. It helps you solve the chicken and egg problem. When Kate and colleagues do this, they find that religion leads to better well-being, and not the other way around. It also turns out that it's much more effective than just joining any club.
There's a lot going on in participation with religious community. You're with other people, you're building social networks. We know that has a positive effect on health and well-being. You are getting tools to deal with your emotions in a more positive way. We know that could be a net gain. People have been trying to pull that apart to say, well, is it just hanging out with other people? And you could do that at church, you could do that at the Y, and it's kind of the same thing. And the research would suggest that it's not. It's not. You don't see the same effect of volunteering at a community group. But there's also things going on in the environment to do with shared beliefs and values, maybe talking about certain disciplines or promoting certain mindsets. And I think it's kind of like the net sum of all of that, that makes religious service participation and engagement in religious community unique.
Whether you believe they're divinely inspired or the result of thousands of years of people trying things out, rituals do help us. There is no test for the fingerprint of God, but we don't have to know or even agree on where a tool came from to use it. We just have to be willing to learn how to use it in the right way. On this podcast, we're going to focus on doing exactly that. We're going to take a peek inside religion's toolbox to see how practices like meditation and giving thanks, eating magic mushrooms, and even firewalking influence what people think and do on their way to finding joy, meaning, and connection. On the next episode, we'll explore spiritual technology to foster something the world could really use right now: kindness.
It's important to have an unbiased mind so you can expand your compassion, loving kindness for all.
How God Works is hosted and written by me, Dave DeSteno. Our senior producer is Josie Holtzman of Future Projects. Associate producer is Sophie Eisenberg. Our executive producer is Genevieve Sponsler. Music and post-production mix and master by Merritt Jacob. The executive producer of PRX Productions is Jocelyn Gonzalez. This podcast was made possible with support from the John Templeton Foundation. If you want to learn more, you can head to my website, www.davedesteno.com.